Thank you for joining us on episode 30 of the Hail Married podcast. I'm Toves, and as always, I'm joined by my husband, the Toves. We're excited to be back to recap the spring practice and throw some Hail Mary shots with our way too early predictions for the upcoming season. Let's get started. Let's start out by recapping some of the coaching changes that have happened over this off-season and then kind of get into a little bit of the roster changes before we talk about what happened and what we saw at the spring game.
That works.
So to recap, we had some significant changes when it comes to our coordinator positions over the offseason. The first being Barry Lunny, who left to be the offensive coordinator for Illinois. Then we had Tommy Perry, who left, is now special teams coordinator for Colorado State. And then finally Rod Wright left kind of late in the game, but he left to be the defensive line coach at the University of Miami.
The U.
So a lot of changes, really just left Jess Lepp as the only coordinator from last year in that same position. Instead of going outside and doing a nationwide search, Trailer instead chose to promote from within. So all of the faces that we'll see now in the coordinator positions are all familiar faces, just not necessarily in the same roles. Offensive coordinator, we have co-coordinators Will Stein and Matt Maddox. Sounds like Will Stein is going to be our play caller. Any initial thoughts on kind of that change?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Illinois can't beat us, so they just take from us.
Exactly.
Right? So, no, but I think, it should be an interesting transition. Obviously, Trailer talks about how everybody's kind of involved in the play calling or in the development of a game plan. So, hopefully from that perspective, there's not going to be too much drop-off, but it'll still be interesting just to see how Will Stein and Matt Maddox not only draw up the game plan, but how do they adjust during the game? Because I think Lunny was good at just having a feel for the games, and he had just a nice way of, really putting Frank in a good position to succeed. So, let's just see how that transpires. I think overall we had kind of talked about offline, like, what does this mean that, we're not doing that nationwide search, like you said, that we're promoting from within. But I think, you can see it a couple different ways, but it would be a good way because of the fact that I think Trailer wants to groom his coaches. He wants to see them grow and succeed. So he's the type of guy who looks like legitimately happy as a boss when people he works for go on to bigger and better things. So, I would say that, obviously he has an eye for talent, especially on the football field. He certainly has an eye for coaches. So I think Will Stein and Matt Maddox can be fine. I'm going to stop short about the Jess Lepp because I think he's been a question mark for some of us, in terms of UTSA fandomverse, I guess you can say. It's been interesting because Rod Wright has been sort of that hot name that you've heard. And, while Jess Lepp kind of took over the defense at the end of like the COVID year, that first year the Trailer was here, and they had this nice run to the bowl game. Let's be honest, one of the things I talked about was, hey, that was a great run, but it was against some bad teams. So, how does he adjust the next year? Well, then we find out that Rod Wright's now, co-defensive coordinator. So, let's see how he performs. I think, in terms of Justin Burke, in terms of special teams, I think he's going to be fine. I think there still just needs to be some personnel upgrades and some changes, and I think we'll talk about it a little bit later from what we saw in the spring game. But overall, I wouldn't be too concerned.
I mean, definitely we'll see continuity in terms of play calling in the style of play, which I think is something that Trailer's been very passionate about, is kind of keeping, that continuity as he makes these promotions from within. Although there was an interesting comment on, it was either the pregame for the spring game or it was the Andy Everett show, one of the two, where there was kind of this comment about Jess Lepp looking to have more exotic play calls for the defense. So we'll have to see what that looks like.
Yeah, and I think this is just a way of maybe disguising some, or presenting something different to the offense. But, ultimately, I think it's not really going to matter. I think there's going to be there's going to be a need for him to kind of back off that a little bit, especially with all the secondary that's kind of coming in. We'll talk about that too, but there's going to be new guys. Mm-hmm. We saw over the last couple of years with experienced secondary, team members, there was confusion. So, I think it's okay to say that, but you got to be able to execute. And if you can't execute these exotic things, then you got to be careful what you're throwing at these guys.
Absolutely. Another interesting or notable coaching change is one of the grad assistants this year on the field, or grad assistants this year on the defense, will be Antonio Parks. So we'll get to see Antonio Parks, kind of staying with the program now that he's out of eligibility. See him, start his coaching career, and he's already had some notable recruiting efforts that we'll talk about a little bit later on. So good to see him staying with the program. And
yeah, which is kind of interesting. Like I think it says a lot about him, the fact that he wants to, obviously continue his career in coaching, but also the fact that he has been lauded for being a really good recruiter. Who's going to be probably one of the best recruiters on your team? It's going to be your players.
Right.
You see them all the time on Twitter, like kind of, encouraging each other. Hey, come on, let's do this here in the 210, or let's do, there's a lot of that kind of hype going around. So be interesting to see that transition now as he goes to being a coach, and then maybe becoming probably, maybe one of the top recruiters. I don't know. I mean, I'm just kind of floating it out there, but that would be kind of cool if, Traylor is able to groom him into something like that.
Yeah. So moving on to the roster, this season, as it stands today with the roster, we're returning 8 on offense and 5 on defense. We have a total of 13 super seniors. A couple of notable names for super seniors that came back this year: Kevin Davis, Trevor Harvinson, Frank Harris, although I guess he still has kind of another year of eligibility. We can get into that later, but he is on the roster as a super senior. Makai Hart, Maka, Corey Mayfield, and Dadrian Taylor, another big
Your
name.
Boy Day.
Yep, and then having Jared Sackett come back for his super senior season,
which our friend Lopez is celebrating and popping bottles of champagne or
absolutely
maybe Miller Lite in Converse.
We'll talk about Sackett's performance at the spring game a little bit later on too. 2 roster changes that are kind of interesting to talk about before we get into some of the other things that we've seen in the spring. Julon Williams has moved from wide receiver to running back. We'll talk, I'm sure, about the running back situation as we get into the spring game. But, for those of you who haven't followed Julon as a high schooler, he actually was a running back, moved to quarterback, and then in college played wide receiver. So it's a return for him to the running back position, although he hasn't played that collegiately.
Yeah, and I kind of thought that it would be cool to see him in the backfield anyway last season, but, obviously it didn't really work out, but kind of moved some guys around. I know that Lunny liked to put Cephas in the backfield at times and kind of run him out of there. So, again, you could see Ty Edwards and Julon in the backfield maybe, but certainly I think with the flexibility that some of these players have, it gives so much opportunity for the offense, and I think gives Frank much more weapons to work with. So that's even better for him.
Yeah, on the defense side, not a huge change, but Trumaine Bell went to the coaches apparently at the end of the season and said that he wanted to kind of try his hand playing sort of the edge linebacker, sort of seeing himself potentially as a replacement for Charles Wiley. So it sounds like the coaches are giving him an opportunity to, make that transition and see how he does.
He always seemed like a tweener to me. Like he just seemed like that sort of kind of down lineman / linebacker guy. So honestly, a good move by him to, recognize that about himself, but even better for the coaches. And, Traylor's been open about it. Some guys, obviously some will be ridiculous about it. He kind of talked about Rashad Wisdom and Day kind of coming up to him about playing running back again.
Right.
Obviously, you're not going to you're going to put them in the backfield. Who knows? Maybe like the depth gets bad enough, you may have to. But regardless, being more serious and seeing a guy like Trumaine Bell and saying that is a good position for you. Let's do it. And it sounds like it's worked. So again, another kind of different look that Lep can throw at an offense.
Let's get into the spring game. we had a couple of big questions really going into spring practice, and then got to see some of it play out in the spring game. Again, on defense, we're only returning 5 starters. Lots of key people who left this past year. Really the secondary being the big areas. Tariq Woolen at cornerback leaving. You have Antonio Parks graduating. So we have, openings at safety. The D-line, we lost Jalen Haynes and Lorenzo Dantzler. And then, of course, Wiley and Hicks. We already sort of talked a little bit about Wiley, but Hicks being another big loss on the outside linebacker side. So lots of questions really going into spring about what those positions were going to look like. A lot of discussion really about cornerback, but I think a lot of questions really when it came to outside linebacker too. So we'll talk a little bit about what you saw at the spring game and then some of the things that we heard throughout spring practice.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing on the defense is the fact that just look how quick they are. It's certainly really seemed like over the last few years just this growth in terms of strength and speed. And obviously Traylor has talked about over and over about Philo and having more time with Philo so that they can go through these programs. But I think the biggest thing for me has been just now seeing them really start to begin to look like a AAC team, not just a Conference USA team or just a team that's just trying to compete for a Conference USA title. Like this is looking like a team that can have some depth that will grow. So you see some of the secondary that they're bringing in. Obviously, in the spring, it was kind of a thin cornerback slots. Right. Mayfield was out, Robinson was out. Certainly gave time for some of the younger players to really spend some more time in front of the coaches, get some looks in front of against Frank Harris, the number 1 team offense. So in terms of growth, I think we're going to start seeing that, and it just helps in terms of the depth. I talked about some of the guys that they have recruited some secondary, and so I think that's going to be crucial when they combine those guys coming in to these guys here. They at least got to have some live reps, and that's going to be important for their growth. I think for me the defensive line was never really a concern because it's been a deep team, and that's been something that Traylor has always kind of harped on is I want plenty of guys on the line. Mm-hmm. So that hasn't been so much of a big deal. The linebackers, I think the will has been the sort of the question. And when you're talking about the weak side, you're kind of talking, I think, more about was Hicks. So anyway, there's just Jamari Robinson was the big name. He was a big recruit, and so there's obviously opportunities for him to step up. But overall, I think I kind of mentioned to you, and I talked about already sort of the strength and speed, but I saw them flying around quite a bit, especially when some of the backups came in for the offense. Not that they weren't flying around before, but certainly a difference from a defensive you've seen not only from the beginning of UTSA football, but I would say even from the last 2-3 years.
Yeah, and interesting, one of the guys that there was a lot of talk about at after spring practice, questions would come up and they'd ask different guys, who's, really kind of progressing throughout the spring. And one of the names that we kept hearing was DeJuan Griffin, who in 2019 was a wide receiver, very similar to Tariq Woolen, and then changed positions to cornerback. But we really didn't hear much about him until recently. And from all accounts, specifically from Traylor, DeJuan is just really doing a great job developing as a cornerback. Although I did find it a little interesting. It seemed like Traylor was throwing some unanticipated shade at Tariq in one of the post-practice interviews.
It really wasn't shade, though. I mean, it was fair.
Well, he said...
It was a nice dig, but,
He said that DeJuan, unlike Tariq, has great hands and can catch the ball. So if the ball comes towards DeJuan, he's going to catch it and maybe rip off for a touchdown. So there's a little bit of a dig there for Tariq.
Well, let's be honest. If Tariq could catch, he'd be probably he'd definitely be going to the first round as a wide receiver with that length and speed. It's enticing as a quarterback position. Though one of the problems is that he doesn't have enough experience as a wide receiver. Though that's what where he was in high school, and then where he started here. So, just imagine him being able to catch and add him to our top 3 receivers that we have like that. Talk about having a deep wide receiver team like that. I mean, that would have just been amazing for Frank.
A couple of other things to keep your eye on, though. In the secondary, we do have a couple of transfers who will be here in the fall. So they've really seemed to secure a lot of depth at this position. Again, we don't know exactly what those transfers are going to look like, so we're just anticipating based on what we've seen on paper from them.
Right.
But if they are close to what we expect, we're going to go from a very thin cornerback room to a very deep cornerback room. And then at safety, if Clifford Chapman stays healthy, I think we'll be in good position there as well.
Yeah. Like I said, they've got some good transfers coming in, and again, Traylor and the coaching staff they've been judicious in who they're offering to. So, as opposed to, I think, I'm not going to say that they're not going to miss. They're going to obviously miss on some guys at some point. But the thing is that when they're bringing in a guy, I think they're looking at. They're not just throwing the scholarship out there. Not like back in the Coker era when we were just trying to find warm bodies. To be honest with you,
right
now it's. Let's make sure these guys can fit on our team, and let's make sure that there's that talent to be able to provide more depth at a position that what we need. So,
all right, let's move on to the offense. I mean, again, we're returning 8 starters. For the most part, our offense, we really know what that's going to look like. The 2 question marks going in really to the spring practice were, who's going to replace Spencer Burford at left tackle, and then the running back situation. So. I guess we can kind of talk briefly about left tackle. It's probably not as big of a concern as the running back position has become. But it looks like it's been this sort of battle between Demetrius Allen and Ernesto Almaraz. Looks like right now Meach or Demetrius Allen is probably the one who'll be the starter. But from all reports, both of them played well throughout spring. So I think we should be in good shape there.
Yeah, and I haven't been as concerned with the left tackle so much, just because that's to the front of Frank's face. He's a left-hander, so he's going to be looking out that way. You're always concerned about the backside. We've got Mekhi Hart there, so that's why I've just, Spencer Burford was terrific at left tackle, and I think he's going to make himself at least some sort of opportunity in the NFL. So, I think that. Having an inexperienced guy at left tackle, if it was like we had Eddie Lee starting, that might be more of a concern, because now you have an inexperienced guy, at left tackle and at the backside. I think we'll be good there. Meach is going to do just fine.
All right, well, let's talk about the running back situation. Going into the spring, you had said you weren't that concerned about running back just because, again, we have so many weapons at wide receiver. Frank can scramble when he needs to. He can be, almost like our running back 2 or 3. But then all of these stories about all of these injuries started to come out. And it seems like that has now taken a different shape.
Well, if the secondary depth wasn't, sort of thin as it was, they decided to not go ahead and go live in terms of the scrimmage. Like, there was no tackling because of the fact of all these running back injuries. Mm-hmm. You had Kedrick Cobbs go down towards ACL in the same leg that he tore in the first responder bowl. You had D'Anthony Lewis, who's been out since the Lamar game, and all they kept saying is they just can't get it right. Whatever it is, they just can't get it right. And then you have Jalen Lott, who goes down. They didn't say what kind of injury. There's been this back and forth. Maybe it was an ankle. There's been talks about a broken ankle. Whatever it is, it's serious enough that it's going to take some time for him to heal. So going into spring practice, you thought there's going to be plenty of running backs that can at least step up. And Kendrick Cobbs and Ty Edwards, who's a transfer, were the ones that were taking first team snaps initially at the beginning of spring practice. It wasn't until Kendrick tears that ACL again where now it's all Ty Edwards. But it became Ty Edwards, a guy that just came from wide receiver to running back, Julon. And then you had Kavorian Barnes, but then Kavorian Barnes goes down with a hamstring injury, so he's out. So then you essentially get to Justin Rodriguez, who's a walk-on.
Right, and a couple other walk-ons that they brought on.
Yeah. So, it was warm bodies. And, I was getting to the point where I was like, well, I'm taking a grad class, so I don't know, maybe I'll try to take a shot at it. Of course, I'd be the best football player ever because I'd get the handoff, and I would start screaming right away because I know that I'd get hit. And I save myself the agony by just screaming right before somebody hits me. But all jokes aside, it just it really, while I joked that I would be out there, the fact is it was getting, I think, that bad. Like there was just trying to find it. And that's why I mentioned earlier, Day and Rashad kept talking to Trailer and kind of saying, hey, you put us in the backfield, we'll take care of business. So who knows, maybe you do see them play. But that's a state of things, and I think what's important here, and as much as I've joked about the running back position here, the thing is you needed to have some time for these guys to at least get into a rhythm with Frank, and Frank even alluded to that at times. Spring practice is where you get to start getting some of your timing down. You start getting to know where the wide receivers are going. Well, obviously he knows the wide receivers well, but the running backs he doesn't. Mm-hmm. The running backs also are in charge of helping with blitz protection. So if Meach is having problems on the left-hand side, they need to know I've got to be looking that way, or whatever it is. But they need to know their blitz protection as well. So I think that there's a missed opportunity here, but it's not because of Trailer or somebody didn't perform to that. It's just they just ran out of warm bodies, and it's certainly, I think, still a question mark. Hopefully they bring in another, and they talked about bringing someone else in, but we haven't heard anything else about a running back yet. Right. So we'll see. But they do get about 2 hours in the summer. I think it's on a weekly basis. I wasn't really sure. I didn't really get all the details on it, but they're going to get some extra time, so that'll help. But it's just trying to get these guys healthy, and that's, to me, that's why this question mark is going to be a huge question mark going into the season, because you've got guys that haven't been able to stay healthy, and you're going to go into a season where it's going to get physical. Some one of these guys is going to go down. So How do you build that depth there?
So you're not saying that we're going to switch to like an air raid offense just to make up for the fact that we have the running backs?
I mean, we might. We kind of had
we're going to stretch it, Frank. Let's see how that goes.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, I don't think it's in his wheelhouse. But if he needs to go to that, then maybe he does. But I've always been a proponent of having Frank in more of a sort of a timing based short pass offense. I think he'd be excellent at that. But I'm just the guy that's on a podcast, so whatever. Right. What do I know?
But the wide receiver room is just as stacked as we expected it to be. One of the areas that we absolutely don't have to worry about.
Yeah. I mean, you feel like if one guy goes down, you might obviously have maybe a drop off in quality, but you're still going to have guys that can produce. Yeah. Certainly no concerns there. I mean, we switched a guy, right? So DeJuan went to cornerback, even though it was a couple seasons ago. You still had to find some other guys. Julon went from wide receiver to running back just because that room is so loaded. So
yeah, and Trailer has talked about the wide receivers quite a few times in post-practice, mentioned Tyke a couple of times and how Tyke has become so consistent. In the past, Trailer nicknamed him Potential because he didn't seem like he was really living up to the potential that we all felt like he could have. But it seems like this year, he said there's been lots of ups, no downs. He's talked a lot about Kennedy Lewis, Chris Carpenter, Isaiah Davis, about their growth. So it seems like, again, we have a lot of depth in that position and a lot of potential for future years because Zakari, JT Clark, and Josh Cephas are all seniors this year.
Yeah, it's a good point. And the one thing I would want to say about Tyke, though, is it's good to see him be more consistent. I think the question we may have raised during the podcast, we may not, has been, does he really like football? And I think there's, obviously it looks like he does, and he's much more focused on it, which it's only going to help him. So, good for him.
Let's talk a little bit about the quarterbacks. Obviously, Frank's the starter, so no question mark there. But there's been sort of this discussion going into the spring game about QB2. And was there really this battle between Eddie Lee and Cam, or was this way of Traylor, just trying to, in some ways, hype up Cam so he sticks around and doesn't hit the transfer portal? So what were your thoughts on that, and then what did you see in the spring game?
So it's interesting you bring that up, because during the interviews, JT Clark brought up at one point that he talked with Eddie Lee about you be you, don't try to be Frank. So I think there was more of a battle for the QB2 spot, because maybe Eddie Lee was trying to do something, trying to be something that he wasn't, and because of it, it was causing issues in how he ran the offense. So fair enough, whatever that was, Cam is able to catch up, but I still saw from Eddie Lee, you see that pop from his arm. When that ball comes out, it's coming. You kind of see it from Cam too. The difference is that Eddie Lee just looks to me so natural at it. Cam, just during the game, there were a few times where I saw him and he was just waiting a little too long to let go of the ball, and that's okay in a controlled scrimmage as you're rolling out, but live, you have to get rid of that ball. You've got to make quicker decisions, and I think that's something that he still needs to continue to work on, decision making. Eddie Lee, I think, seemed like he was a little better with his decision making, but then let's be honest, he actually got live snaps last season.
Right.
He got to play against Lamar. He had some time against North Texas. So all of that put together, I didn't understand why Cam was in the running for QB2, but I think JT answered our question. Like, that's what it was, is that Eddie Lee was trying to do something that he shouldn't be doing. And, sometimes you think you need to be a certain mold of something in order to get some snaps, and just didn't work out. I mean, obviously.
Well, Eddie Lee and Frank are just different quarterbacks. I mean,
right.
Eddie Lee is more of a pocket passer, and Frank is really more of a scrambler. So if he was really trying to emulate Frank in some ways, I mean, that's not going to play to his strengths.
Right, but I mean, I think you get the gist of it. Like, here's the franchise essentially. You got Frank, and this is how he runs the offense. I think something that Eddie Lee just needs to learn as he continues to grow is, you want to take aspects of what Frank does. Specifically, I would say some of the intangibles like leadership, stuff off the field. But when you go out there, you need to be you, because that's what's going to make you successful. Josh Adkins probably would have been good to probably tell him the same thing. Mm-hmm. I will say, last thing, Diego Teo, coming off an injury, looked a lot better than I thought. Now I'll say this, he still looks like a high schooler coming in, in his first few practices in college, but I can see why they're not as concerned about some of the depth at quarterback.
Yeah, and just right before this podcast, there had been a conversation about a transfer quarterback who had come and visited a guy from Auburn who just entered the transfer portal, last name Davis. He, I guess, just committed to Alabama State, so that question has been answered. He will not be coming to UTSA, so it looks like, unless they pivot again, likely it's going to be Eddie Lee, QB2, and then Cam Peters. Yeah,
and I mean, let's just hope that the depth holds up. But I could still see them trying to bring another veteran quarterback in.
So before we get right off of the quarterback position, though, you had an interesting story about Frank that you saw from the spring game and how he interacted with the defense. So
we ended up in the end zone area, and it was closest, I would say, it was when Frank was kind of coming towards us. And I don't know the direction, so I don't want to say that.
Right before he threw the direction he was going as he was driving for his touchdown
for the touchdown.
Pass.
So anyway, he's as he's coming down, he hits Cephas, and it's short of the goal line, but they were trying to play it off as a touchdown. They're trying to kind of influence the referees, and Frank goes and I don't know who had the ball. Somebody in the defense had grabbed the ball, and he grabs it out of their hands, and he's all, look, no, touchdown. He's trying to celebrate. Drew Prox is telling him to get back on the other side of the line, and Frank gets in his face. So it wasn't, I would say, anything malicious, but immediately it was sort of this. You hear about Frank being feisty, how he is in practice, and
uber competitive.
Yeah, and that's the Frank that I wanted to see. I didn't want to see Frank just come out here and just try to throw 2 bombs to one of the receivers and then, okay, cool. That didn't show me that you actually progressed. It just shows me that you came out here and threw 2 bombs. That's kind of what happened last spring season. This one, he was much more meticulous and showed how much he's progressed in terms of driving the team down the field. So it was interesting to see that feisty moment because I want to say that I caught him telling Drew that they were about to score in the next play. Sure enough, they do. But, it was just this... just seeing Frank, who's this very lithe guy as it is, getting up in Drew Prox's face. And it was an interesting moment to witness, I think, as a fan. But certainly you can see why the team really, kind of gets behind Frank. That type of feistiness, that type of, competitiveness has to rub off on all these guys.
All right, well, let's talk real briefly about the special teams unit. Obviously, we got to see Sackett back. He missed a 52-yard field goal, just kind of hit the upright. But from everything that we've seen in practice video and everything we've heard, it sounds like, he's in pretty good shape. Interesting kind of journey that Sackett has had, being the guy leaving to go on to greener pastures. And when they interviewed him, it kind of sounded like, he has had a little bit of a humble pill, kind of leaving to go onto these greener pastures, realizing that the grass isn't always greener on the other side and coming back. It's sort of interesting to see him now playing the backfill to his backfill when he left, and
yeah.
Seeing how much Hunter really grew over those years when Jarrett was gone. But it sounds like he's going to be probably the place kicker, or he'll be the place kicker, and then Everett Ornstein will be the kickoff specialist, unless something changes.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously what I think you'd see anyway. But I think for Sackett, he just needs to go ahead and again, I think take the advice from JT. Just be you. Mm-hmm. You put it through the uprights, and we'll be good.
On the kickoff the punt returns, though, we did get to see that they're trying out a bunch of different wide receivers at punt return. I think Zakaria was out there, JT Clark was out there, Cephas, maybe even Tyke. There were several different guys, that they tried out. So, we do have a lot of great guys in the wide receiver room with good hands. So I am hoping that we will be in good shape at our punt return position.
Great hands, and I think be more dynamic. So, I think this team is going to need some of that. They're going to need some sort of, dynamic playmaker back in the punt return instead of just taking fair catches. They're going to need some yards from there. So good to see from that.
All right, before we move on, talk a little bit about single digits. Of course, for those of you who've been listening, you're all aware. Every year we're going to revote, or the team is going to revote on the single digit guys. Several of them left this past year, so there's lots of single digit numbers out there. Of course, assuming that everyone who was a single digit last year who's returned is going to repeat in those numbers. But who are some of your candidates or guys that you think may end up getting a single digit in the fall when they vote on it?
I think Oscar Cardenas is one. Certainly, I think he's proven on the field what type of player he is. But, obviously we don't know about his leadership. So I think it'll be interesting to see if he's able to get one. Certainly, I think it'd be interesting to see if Lucas Dean gets one. Mm-hmm. And I'm just thinking of Hunter Duplessis last year also, right. Had one. The Sackett get one, because of their leadership. So those are like just a couple of names that I thought of in terms of just performance. Again, does it translate to leadership? Not necessarily. So, I don't think we've ever seen really anybody that's a surprise, though. Like, everybody just seems like one of the top players has been up there.
Yeah, I think the only surprise we've seen throughout this whole process was just Jamal Lignan being so young of a player and getting a single-digit number.
It's true.
For me, I'm looking at JT Clark. It'll be interesting to see if all three of our top wide receivers this year are single digits. And then, of course, last year I talked about how Kelechi had kind of shared on social media how disappointed he was that he didn't get a single digit last year, and just kind of commented that it'll be interesting to see how he handled that disappointment. And I think it'll be telling to see if this year he gets a single digit, because that will either demonstrate that he, developed those leadership skills over the course of last year, or, sometimes guys don't handle disappointment well. And so we'll see whether or not he steps up and gets that single digit.
I'm glad you brought up the defense, because one guy could be Lamont McDougal.
Mm-hmm.
If anything, just for the goggles/spectacles. Like, how is that not yet? Like, that's got to be like a shirt, right? There's got to be like an opportunity there.
Right.
But who knows? Maybe he is a great leader, and we'll see him in the single digits. But that's got to be an opportunity with the goggles. I don't know. I thought about getting a picture with him because I love seeing him in those classes. After the game, I just forgot about it until we were like leaving. But at that point, anyway, I was like sneezing my head off.
Well, UTSA just announced the NIL kind of partnership that they're having, so that these guys can have jerseys made and use the UTSA logo. In addition to their name, so you can have a T-shirt with a UTSA logo, you can have your name on a jersey, so maybe there'll be like a Lamont McDougal
spectacles. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I don't know.
Like a rowdy head with the spectacles on it, right in the front. I'm just saying.
There's lots of opportunities out there. Anybody in marketing, you can get with Lamont, make it happen.
All right, let's have a little fun and do some way, way too early predictions. Let's focus on the season schedule. Right now, as you see it, what is UTSA's record at the end of the year?
I'm picking 8-4 again. What about you?
I'm going to go with 7-5. We'll go through it here shortly.
I feel like this is what we picked last year too. So hopefully we're going to have like that 12-2 season.
Like 20% of the time, our records are right all the time. So
right.
Yeah. So let's go through the schedule. We'll break it up in quads, and we'll kind of go from there. First 4 games: Houston at home, Army and UT away, and then Southern here at home. Southern we know is a gimme.
Yeah.
If we can't beat Southern, then the season's going to go awry anyway. But in terms of Houston, Army, and UT, I feel like Houston's a chance to get an upset here. However, with so many questions, specifically with secondary and with our running backs, I think it's tough to be able to say that there's going to be an opening home victory. How are you looking at the first 3 games?
Yeah, I have our first 3 games as a loss. I have the outside potential of a upset being Army versus Houston. I just feel like because we still have so many pieces coming into fall camp that weren't in our spring camp, there may be just some tweaks that they need to make in that game, so it might be a little bit harder. And then again, Houston is one of the best teams, at least on paper, that Houston's had in a long time. Army, on the other hand, I see as our potential upset. I think we've had challenges against Army in the past, injuries primarily being the big one. If we can stay healthy, I think that's the area where we have a shot. Again, my biggest concern out of these first 4 games is just minimizing injuries, staying healthy, so that when we go into conference play, we're in a good situation, because I feel like there's a lot of opportunity for us to really have a lot of wins in the conference play.
I'm glad you brought up the injuries with Army, because we have lost a quarterback. Maybe not completely lost a quarterback, but Frank first injured his shoulder, in 2019 against Army, and then the next week against North Texas, he's out for the season. And then, of course, Lowell Narcisse in 2020, since he breaks his ankle and is out for the season against Army as well. So, let's knock on some wood, and hopefully we can get out of this game. And honestly, these first 3 games are going to be physical. So just get out of them healthy, and then we can have a good conference season. And that's really we should be kind of focusing on anyway. I agree with you. I think, Houston and Army really could go either way.
I would love it if we pulled 2 upsets in a row, but just being realistic.
Again, let's be healthy. Let's, way too early. Maybe we change our mind at the beginning of next season. So let's go to the next quad. It's Middle Tennessee away, Western Kentucky at home, FIU away, North Texas at home. Again, I think FIU is another gimme. They've just been in such disarray over the last couple seasons that, there's just no way that they, I think, put it together enough to be able to compete against a UTSA team that's this loaded. Middle Tennessee and Western Kentucky, I think Western Kentucky has some questions they need to answer because they lost a lot of studs on offense. So,
not to mention their offensive coordinators new, yeah.
Correct. So I think those 2 games should be the wins. Where I start kind of asking questions are Middle Tennessee and North Texas. You have 4 wins. I have 1 loss, and the 1 loss is to North Texas. North Texas, we're 2-4 since 2016. So, it's been sort of a lopsided series, so to speak. Mm-hmm. I don't see that it's necessarily... I want to say it's a rivalry, but with all these blowouts and things, like the games really haven't been as close as we would have liked, I would say. It's hard to characterize it as a rivalry, but it is fun to go back and forth with North Texas fans. Why do you see it as a win?
I think, if you look at our record with North Texas, the team that's been at home has been the winning team. And yes, there have been these blowouts. Last season, a little bit of an anomaly in terms of what happened at North Texas. I think because we had such a great win with UAB, we had a little bit of a letdown. There was weather. It was the end of the season. There's just a lot of factors. Because we're going to be playing in the Alamo Dome against North Texas, and because I feel like the guys that were there last year are really going to want to, avenge themselves from that loss. I feel like they're going to be dialed in for that. Even though it's the game right before the bye week, I feel like they're going to go into that North Texas game very focused, wanting to get the win, hit the bye week, and then, move into their toughest game at the schedule.
I think we're going to be kind of beat up going into this last game before the bye week.
Sure.
That's why I'm kind of going for it as a loss. I still think it's kind of 50-50. I've gone back and forth, but I really felt better about saying it's a loss right now because of just the way we lack depth at running back. And, I'm kind of concerned about the quarterbacks if we can't get out of the Army game and the first 4 games healthy. Mm-hmm. Frank is susceptible to getting nicked up. So, last season I said his greatest ability was his availability. So that's what I'm hoping we can continue to see throughout this season. If we can't see it throughout the season, then I think that's where, even though I don't see a great drop-off, I do see us losing the opportunity to play in a conference title game if it's Eddie Lee. That said, let's move to the last 4 games. We'll go past the bye week, which we've won every single season we've played it. We've got UAB away, La Tech at home, Rice away, and UTEP at home. I mean, look, I get UTEP is probably going to be better than they were last season, but they don't have a very good quarterback. And I just don't see them. I think they're going to have another bloated record where, they're probably chasing, bowl eligibility, but I just don't see us losing to UTEP because, again, that's been sort of dominated by UTSA since 2016, really. We have not lost to them. So, and some of these games haven't been close. Like, it's not like it's been we've just barely knocked them off. It's been a sizable advantage we have over UTEP. So, again, Rice, I think, another team that's just fallen on hard times. La Tech and UAB are going to be interesting, but we both have UAB as a loss. Mm-hmm. Give me your reasons why UAB is a loss.
We've really struggled playing UAB in Birmingham. I think UAB is going to come into this game really wanting, again, just like we want to avenge the game that happened at North Texas, UAB is really going to want this win. They're going to be very focused on this win because they want, to get back to the conference championship as well. Last year was the first year since 2018 they hadn't made the conference championship. So I think they're going to be very dialed in, very focused. Sounds like they have, fixed some of the issues that they had last year. They have a returning quarterback. So I think they are really the toughest competition in Conference USA. And frankly, that's why I have them as our only loss in Conference USA, or potential loss. But I don't think it's going to be a blowout.
Yeah, no, I think, frankly, UAB and UTSA are the 2 best teams. The problem, I think, with both of them is that they have a penchant for losing games that they shouldn't. UAB in particular. they dropped a game against Rice last season for who knows what reason, and it cost them the chance to go to or at least lost them a chance to go to the conference championship game. But that said, even if we lose to UAB, and even if we're having 2 losses, I still think UAB's got 1 loss, and I still think because these are the 2 top teams, and because there's no divisions this season, it's, I think, just a pathway for both of them just to get through the season and then meet in Birmingham. I think it's December 3rd, December 4th, whatever it is. And again, way too early. But if we're playing in the conference championship game, I think we get our first win in Birmingham and beat UAB for the conference championship game. And I just love to see Judy's face again as she's looking at both teams. Yep. 2 teams leaving for the AAC. That bitter smile again, but who cares? Give us that trophy.
Absolutely. All right, before we go, let's talk about the elephant in the room. The men's basketball program and the fate of Coach Hinson. What are your thoughts?
Either way, I'm fine. Is he the right coach? I don't know. Certainly I think it's pointing to the fact that, he's going to be dismissed at some point. We see his on-court issues. There's a specific type of team he likes, which is one not based on defense. This is not very defensive-minded at all. Offense is very much just kind of stand around and watch a guy kind of do his thing and take some bad shots. I still go back to earlier, I want to say it was one of our podcasts near the end of the football season where you brought up Iowa State football and Iowa State basketball, and you said, wow, they really move the ball around quickly as opposed to UTSA. And I was like, yeah, that's a problem because the type of team they have this season needed to be much more of a team play. They didn't really have a scorer. I think Germany is fine. I think certainly he lacks some offensive skills, certainly lacks some defensive skills. And, you still could have built something around him and be able to kind of maneuver around him and give him the opportunity to be the star of the team. It just doesn't feel like he was given that opportunity. So anyway, certainly those are some on-court issues. I think, looking at it away from it, the type of player that he's recruiting really is very much a bad decision-making one. We look back at some of the stuff like with Javon and Keaton. Like Keaton certainly showing that he's more of a pro player and, maybe needed that environment to flourish and show his skills. Whereas Javon is where we think he's going to be, like a lower division, like Spanish team. And, he's putting up like 35 points a game, but, that's where he's going to be. He's not going to be in the NBA. But I still look at those teams, those Henson teams with Javon and Keaton, and I think they performed exactly where you would imagine them to perform. They were competitive in the Conference USA, but they weren't ever championship-winning teams. Like I never looked at that team and saw, or any of those teams and thought, this is a team that's going to make a run to the NCAA tournament. And so you think about it, this is now probably about 13 years that we're going to go to the 3rd conference. So we're going to go up another conference level. Like we barely compete now in Conference USA, and now we're going to make another jump. It's a lot to ask a program that hasn't been invested in, especially from the fact that, in the Southland Conference, I believe they won the outright regular season title once or twice, and only one of those times did they actually go to the NCAA tournament. Mm-hmm. It was them being a number 2, number 3 seed that's how they would, make the hot, Southland Conference run, and that's how they got into the tournament. But even so, looking at this, it's just, I guess my question to you is this: what are realistic expectations for the UTSA basketball team?
Yeah, I think we have to set aside kind of the fandom expectations, which is we're going to be in the tournament, the NCAA tournament consistently, and look at the facilities, look at the investment that we've made in the program, and say, I think realistic expectations are that we're competitive in Conference USA. And certainly this year we weren't very competitive. So from that perspective, this year obviously was a disappointment.
But we knew that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we knew that going in. So, I guess were we expecting something different? And I feel like everybody keeps expecting something different. So, so you feel like it's just got to be competitive.
Right.
I agree with you. I think it has to be competitive. But I'll ask you then this. Why is Henson still here? Like, I think if there was going to be a move, it should have been made. It would have been made a while back. Lisa Campos does not mess around. If she feels like it's time for you to go, it's time for you to go. So why do you think that he's still here?
I think it's all about dollars and cents. And Dr. Campos has looked at all of the investments that we have made or are making in UTSA athletics, and there's a lot of money that has been committed and is about to be committed. And we don't have an endless bucket of money and huge, donors who are going to donate lots of money to help us achieve those goals. So she's looking at it from a practical standpoint, in my opinion. And this year, Henson had an $800,000 buyout. Next year, it's a $400,000 buyout. The following year, she can let him go without a buyout. And so I think we're likely going to see Henson through the end of his contract, because from a dollar and cents standpoint, Dr. Campos realizes that she's just invested a lot of money in the race facility, a lot of money in Traylor and his staff, money in Coach Aston and her staff, and she's going to have to pay the next basketball coach even more money to play in the AAC, and we have to get a new training facility and a new convocation center. And she just has to be practical about where that money's coming from. So I think likely we're going to see obviously we'll see Henson here next year. We'll likely see him the following year, and then when the contract expires, that's when I think she'll make the move, barring an absolute disaster next year. And a 2-0, 2-win season, that would be probably the absolute disaster that it would have to be to make the move next year. But I think, again, this is just about dollars and cents, because the amount of attendance over the course of UTSA history is not significantly lower than it's been in the past. So for her to make up Henson's buyout at $400,000 next year is going to take a lot more tickets than I think any coach is going to be able to sell in that convocation center. And that's just the reality. And unfortunately, that's not what UTSA fans are going to want to hear, because, again, we've seen the success of Coach Aston. We've seen the success of Coach Traylor, and we want to see that success in basketball. But this is going to be a long journey to get to that point.
Yeah, and that's really where I was hoping you would head to, is the fact that, the attendance hasn't been there. Like, even under, Javon Jackson and Keaton Wallace, we talk, a lot of fans talk about how great of a scoring duo they were, blah, 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 but you still weren't showing up. So if you weren't showing up there,
we're not selling out the convocation center at $10 a ticket.
Yeah.
So, even the games where they were giving away free tickets this year, we're still challenged to get, something other than a couple hundred people to go to the game.
So let's pivot, because you brought up Coach Aston. Coach Aston, I think, has now kind of squashed a little bit of the sort of facilities talk, because she's, I guess, almost got two big signees today. One was Kyra White, who was a member of Judson's basketball team. She's transferring from USC. She'll have two years of eligibility left. The other one is a head scratcher, only because this doesn't happen for UTSA. So I'm sure we'll hear more about this. But Jordan Jenkins, who is, I think, the most improved player for the Pac-12, has decided to transfer over to UTSA. Which is, that's a
huge win.
It is a huge win. I'm trying to get it out here, but that's something that not even Coach Traylor could do. Like, as much as Coach Traylor has brought in some players, it's not like he brought in Tua Tagovailoa to play quarterback at UTSA. It's not like he brought in any other big player here. So it's like Coach Aston has really thrown it on the table and said, Lisa, I'm going to put my expectations. I'm going to hike him up. And you're going to see a better product on the court. That said, I just want to be realistic here. She could have barely put any time and effort last season, and I think she still would have topped what the basketball team has been before.
Right.
But there's a certain charisma with her that I think, if you just pass by her, go up to her and say hello, that you can see is similar to Coach Traylor, and to me, you start seeing the similarities in what Lisa Campos wants in her coaches. I think Henson isn't as charismatic. I made a joke, way back in the I think in the football season when we went to the meet the basketball players, and I spoke up, kind of took a little joke with Juice at the time, who's now transferred, and Henson came up and talked to me afterwards, but it reminded me of me. I'm a pretty shy guy, so I'm not I'm just gonna kind of say hi and then just kind of drift off, and that's how he kind of played it, and it's not what it's going to take to revive the program. So, you can totally see the differences, but I think Coach Aston is building something special in terms of UTSA women's basketball. And I think it's going to be fun to see over the next couple of years, see how far she can grow it. Because if she's able to do some of this without facilities, without, with the promise of, something in the end, it can be fun. And but who knows? Maybe Coach Aston doesn't stick around. But hopefully she leaves somebody that can take her place.
Signing day for basketball is April 13th to May 18th. So keep your eyes on Twitter. You're going to start to see more, both on the men's and women's side, of these signees kind of coming on board. One last thing we got to talk about before we move on, NFL draft predictions. This year, likely going to be the biggest year when it comes to the draft for UTSA. Obviously, Marcus Davenport going in the first round is right now
Huge,
the pinnacle.
yeah.
The pinnacle for UTSA in the draft. However, we have multiple players with the opportunity to get drafted for the first time ever. Tariq Woolen obviously being the big name out there. Lot to talk about where he might go. What's your gut?
Third round. I think he goes third round, maybe about mid-third. And, I'm going to get the chance to be there, which is an opportunity of a lifetime. So I'll certainly be sporting my UTSA flag, or at least definitely my hat, just to hear him have his name called. So it's going to be I think a good thing for UTSA. We're
going to hear a bird's up squeal after they say Tariq Woolen's name. You're going to know where it came from. Spencer Burford, what are your thoughts on where he's going to end up?
I'm seeing him now in the fifth round. So certainly there's been some things that teams have seen, but I would say he gets drafted on the third day, and certainly I think somebody's going to get a little bit of a project, but I think someone that can contribute long term. So I think that both Woolen and Burford could be guys that could be in the league for a few years.
Sincere McCormick, what do we think about him?
I think he's going to be an undrafted free agent. Even going into this, I never felt like he was going to be drafted, or if he was, it's going to be like late 7th round. I think that there's nothing that he did at the combine or has done that says I'm much more special than some of these other players. And the fact that running backs really aren't a commodity and they're not going like in the first round or anything like that pretty much tells you, this isn't going to happen. So
yeah, and don't panic, UTSA fans, if he does not get drafted. I mean, again, there's always that possibility he can go in the 7th round. Don't panic. Feel really confident that he's going to get picked up as a undrafted free agent, but you got to temper your expectations. Again, running backs this year, it's a very deep running back draft list. Again, no one's expected, as deep as the running back group is, no one is expected to go in the first round. So no shot against Sincere if he goes as an undrafted free agent.
Yeah.
Couple of other guys that, might hit that undrafted free agent radar. What are your thoughts?
I would say Charles Wiley. Certainly Clarence Hicks might have an opportunity. Jalen Haynes, possibly. The surprise name would be BJ Daniels, but he has done a good job in terms of playing special teams at UTSA, so he could use that experience to carve himself out a career in the NFL. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, good for him. He was able to find his niche at the very end of his career, and look, it could get him an NFL contract.
Yeah, Traylor said they've gotten a lot of calls about him, so that's he's like the kind of surprise dark horse, right?
Yeah. And good for him, though. Again, I can't say that enough. I mean, that's, going from a guy that probably wasn't going to be drafted to somebody that could potentially sign a contract and, be a contributing member, it's great.
Yeah, I think, looking at the program in the NFL, we're likely to have several guys on rosters. Don't forget, we still have Kevin Strong with the Titans, and of course Marcus Davenport with the Saints. So I think it's going to be really exciting to watch the NFL now. Not something I normally like to do, but I will watch and support former Roadrunners. And then finally, April 19th and 20th are UTSA Giving Days. Lots of different programs have the opportunity for you to give money. There's supposed to be some fun activities going on campus if anybody's on campus, so come out and support UTSA if you're able to. Thank you for joining us on the Hail Married podcast. I'm Toves.
And I'm Toves.
We'll be back this summer to gear up for another season of UTSA football.
Birds up.